Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, 142 square miles of landmarks and history. Now, most of you may know everything there is to know about this city, but have you ever set foot in the suburbs? Media, Levittown, Abington. All names I'm sure most of you have probably never heard, but they're all right next door to the city you call home. Now, Philadelphia has a rich history, dating back to the 1600s and all, so its suburbs must be too, right? The suburbs really started growing directly after World War II, and there were a lot of factors that went into their growth. At the end of World War II, we see countless soldiers returning home with no job, education, or home. So, the government institutes the GI Bill in 1944, which expanded benefits for returning veterans. Veterans got unemployment compensation, their tuition was covered, and they even got guaranteed loans on any home. Most of these returning soldiers used the bill to go through college, get job training, and an estimated 20% of homes built after the war were bought by veterans.
That's the sound of the police!
After all, the bill did incentivize buying from new construction with better deals. How does this tie into the creation of the suburbs? Well, hold on, I'm getting there. So, millions of people, veterans, are suddenly entering the economy, which means there's a post-war economic boom. Houses were being built faster than ever. The factories that were making weapons for the war effort were turning to manufacturing goods for citizens. This included cars. Before this, the idea of a family car was non-existent. Automobiles were pretty much only for the wealthy. As cars became more accessible, the highways had to be rebuilt to accommodate. This was great because it meant you could now afford to live far away from work, which before the war was impossible. Not only was the economy booming, but so were babies. Many of these returning veterans ended up starting families now that the war was over and, well, making babies. So, now there's all these new babies, and veterans have families and benefits that let them get really good deals on any new house, so why not go big? What a better place to put a couple thousand houses than just north of Philly? I know you were thinking it, and so was William Levitt, who figured out a way to build one house every 16 minutes. Like, watch this video, it's crazy.
The building of a house in one day is shown during the next 45 seconds by stop-motion photography. These are the 36 men who built this house. Another day, another 40 houses.
What is considered the first modern suburb, dating back to 1952, is Levittown, PA. Levittown was founded by William Levitt and offered affordable housing to both returning veterans and regular people. Not only was this housing affordable, but there were 17,000 large single-family houses, each with yards and space. This made it an easy choice for many to move from the crowded row homes of northeast Philly to the cheap and spacious town right above them. Several towns perfectly identical to Levittown began replacing rural areas all over the country. In the midst of the post-war boom, everyone wanted to live in these little towns. Aided by the popularity of the TV, the idea of owning a car, a big house, a dog, and 2 kids soon became the new American dream. Shows like The Donna Reed Show and Father Knows Best spawned the image of a perfect family. A white family of 4 or 5 living in the suburbs with a father who leaves every day for work, married to a stay-at-home mom with mischievous boys and well-behaved girls. While few families could actually live up to this dream, the best they could do was live in the suburbs. Notice how I said white in my description of a 50s perfect family, quote-unquote? There's a reason for that. Before the non-discrimination laws came about in the 60s, some suburbs, including Levittown, had it in their charter that no homes could be sold to anyone who wasn't white. This was actually very common practice and went hand in hand with the practice of redlining. Redlining is the practice of denying services or selectively raising prices to residents of certain areas based on the racial or ethnic composition of those areas. What you see now is a map of Philadelphia made in 1937 that established what areas would get mortgages and what areas wouldn't. Places in green were considered best for lending. These were predominantly white neighborhoods, and places in red are where banks were discouraged from lending. Surprise, these were predominantly black neighborhoods. Redlining made it harder and more expensive to buy a house in larger black neighborhoods, and encouraged white flight to the suburbs where housing was cheaper. Now, we can't talk about the suburbs without talking about white flight. For those who don't know, white flight was a mass movement of white people fleeing the racial integration of big cities. After World War II, aided by new highways, millions of African Americans started leaving the South and entering the big cities in the North. White people, afraid of diversity, had two options to prevent racial integration: fight or flight. Since fighting, aka treating minorities like utter crap, quickly became outlawed, many chose the flight option. Where did they flee? The newly developed suburban utopias, of course. Suburban housing prices skyrocketed as wealthier white folk came in. As white people left big cities, city prices dropped, attracting more African Americans and immigrants. This took place in several North American cities. As you can guess, Philadelphia took part in this too. In 1960, the surrounding suburbs had more population than Philadelphia itself. Most of these were, and still are, massively white populations. Even today, white flight is taking place in Philadelphia. The Philadelphian white population has dropped 1/3 since 1990, while the black population has risen 3%, Hispanic population has risen 110% since 1990. The Asian population increased even more by 126%. If you've ever been to the Philly suburbs, you'll find they're overwhelmingly white. The town my friend Danny lives in, Wallingford, is 90% white, according to 2010 census. When I asked him, he could only think of 14 black people he knows that live there. Let's talk about modern suburbs, shall we? All this talk of the 60s is making me feel old. What do you think of when you think about the suburbs today? Do any two particularly big suburbs with particularly big malls come to mind? Cherry Hill and King of Prussia, perhaps? I can guarantee that the only reason any of you know these names is because of the malls. Millennials nowadays no longer see the suburbs as the ideal place to live. We see it as a bunch of ugly houses centered around a big shopping district. The King of Prussia Mall is obviously named after the town it resides in, but what was King of Prussia the town named after? You probably aren't wondering. Well, I'll tell you. King of Prussia, the town, was named after a Civil War-era tavern. The inn was named King of Prussia to attract the business of Prussian soldiers. Norristown, another Philadelphia suburb, was named after Isaac Norris, who purchased the town's land from William Penn. Upper Darby was named after a town in England, and Percassie was a corruption of the Lenape word Pokescossing. Pokescossing? Yeah, sure. If you look into the naming history of basically any Philadelphia suburb, I can guarantee you they were named after one of these four things: a successful shop in the area, a town somewhere in Europe, someone who owned the town or did something important to its history, a Native American word that English settlers butchered. So we know how and when the suburbs formed, and what factors went into that. We know the racial makeup of the suburbs. We know how most suburbs were named. What we don't know is the future of the suburbs. Naturally, we don't know the future, but we can predict it. Experts predict that in the next decade, the suburbs will see a rise in bigger, modern urban developments. Things like apartment high-rises, office spaces, hotels, and retail space. But why is this? I thought suburbs were just miles and miles of identical houses. Well, my answer for you is that it's all for the money. While they may be spending millions of dollars on redevelopment, most suburbs are turning what was once abandoned lots, malls, and stores into shopping centers, apartments, and big chain stores. Urban developments with less sprawl cost less in maintenance to keep up than those with more spread out houses that the suburbs feature. Not only do they cost less, but urban developments see bigger and faster returns on investments from property tax. So, suburbs are becoming more urban. That's inevitable. What goes hand in hand with urbanization is integration. Today, about 76% of America's African American population lives in the suburbs. In some places, suburbs are extremely multicultural. This integration will only grow, seeing as the world is becoming more aware and accepting of different races and cultures. In fact, 2 Houston, Texas suburbs have already become more diverse than the city itself. So, there it is. Way more than everything you'll ever need to know about the suburbs. How they started, who lives there, how they were named, and how they might turn out to be. I hope you learned something after listening to all that. This has been a history of the suburbs. Peace.